Mary,
Hey,
are we all
everybody.
okay? Um, Welcome everybody to Village Voices. This is the last of the Village Voices for the spring season. I'm Trudy Peterson, who coordinates Village Voices for you. Uh, Before we start with our speaker tonight, let me tell you that we don't have Village Voices in July and August, but we'll be back with you in September. In September, we're going to have a man who just wrote a book on American presidents in diplomacy and war. And in October, we are going to have a woman lawyer who specializes in immigration law. And so do come back to us in September for the fall season. I have invitations out for November and December, but I can't promise you anything yet for those. But we will take a vacation in July and August. Now, a couple of technicalities. First of all, great thanks to Mary Bloodworth, who makes this possible, and Judy Berman behind the scenes. Thanks to Majine Daniels, who does publicity, and Karen Stuck, who makes sure this gets in newsletters. Without them, this series just wouldn't work, and we're very grateful to their continued work on behalf of this series of talks. Now, about tonight, we do suggest that you keep yourself muted. It just helps in the transmission of this program. If you are going to have a question or a comment that's just burning, but you don't want to interrupt the speaker, please put it in the chat. Mary and I will monitor the chat. We'll make sure we come back to you and get your question or comment in at the end of the presentation. So tonight we have with us Tommy Wells. Many of you know him from a political life that he led here in the district. He's a Texan, a native Texan, but I don't think he's coming to you from Texas tonight. He came to Washington and worked in the district's Child Protective Services Agency at first, then turned to elective office, starting from an ANC commissioner here on the Hill through the DC Board of Education and 2 terms on the City Council. Then he went into the administration, and he importantly served 8 years as the director of the Department of Energy and Environment, which is about protecting the environment and conserving the natural resources of the district. He has now retired from that and instead is an advocate for a breathable, livable, walkable city. So here you are. The Zoom room is yours, Tommy Wells.
Trudy, thank you very much. You know, you represent, I think, probably one of the most educated, knowledgeable groups that I could ever talk to, which is a little intimidating. And so I am going to leave plenty of time at the end for questions, where really when you speak to a group that is as knowledgeable as all of you, it's better to use all your time and just say, I'm sorry, time's up. But that's the politician in me. But I have to, be your former director of energy and environment. So I will be sure there's plenty of time for you to answer questions. I also want to say that Capitol Hill Village, as you all know, we're very proud of having the village. It's the first one in DC. I remember getting the mayor at the time, Vince Gray, to provide grant support so that we could try to be equitable in how we serve people. It just reflects the values and the energy and certainly the smarts of our community to have such an important organization. I know I first really saw it in operation when I saw my political mentor, Jan Eichhorn, need the services and how much it helped her to be able to stay in her home, but also gave us comfort that that she was managing things well. So kudos to Capitol Village, but also just how important that is to me and why I'm honored, pleased, and happy to be your speaker. Let me also say that kind of a thank you to all of you, for those especially that have been here for a while. I've had probably one of the most exciting, charmed careers that fit me and tailored for me than you could ever possibly have. I've had an amazing career. And again, many of you here has helped make that happen, whether it be through politics or being my neighbor, just encouraging me, and also just being wise counsel when necessary. So thank you very much for that. And so I'll talk a little bit about the journey to get where I am, but I think it's important to note that I'm speaking to you from our family cabin in the woods in Minnesota on a major lake. And this has been in our family since 1934. So I grew up really close to learning about nature and water, and very comfortable, but also very much a part of my life. And then I mostly grew up in Alabama. And Alabama has more navigable waterways than any other state in the union. And I grew up canoeing and fishing. And so what I didn't expect, that when I went to the University of Minnesota to get a master's in social work, that I would end up being essentially, in comparison to other states, the Secretary of the Environment. That was a great journey to get there, and you all helped bring me along that way. I'll also note that when I ran for council, I thought a lot about what we'd been through coming through the 90s as a community. And what I thought about is why people that could have moved, why did they stay here? And people that are moving here, why are they moving here? And spent a lot of time talking to some friends about that. And that's where I came up with people supporting and loving livable, walkable neighborhoods. And that became a slogan. It became my brand, but it was just purely from observation of, why do I live here? Why would anybody move here, especially coming through what we came through? And that's because people desired livable, walkable neighborhoods. And we have that and have gotten better at that and have had more amenities. But the quality of life that I have on Capitol Hill, where I can walk to my dentist or walk to fresh food at the market, other things, get to great transit. It's a spectacular place to live. And it's, it shaped who I am in a lot of ways. So when I was on the council, through the interest of my wife, mostly Barbara, we travel a bit. And I would usually get around 9 days off around Easter when I felt like I could travel. And we'd go to different places. And once we went out to Switzerland. And I was finishing my first term on the council. And in Switzerland, the trash management, the cleanliness, the pride they took in their waterways really stuck with me. It's just a gorgeous, gorgeous country, but also the amount of pride and what they do to keep their waterways clean and their byways everywhere clean. I thought, you know what, I'm up for reelection, and there's always a chance I won't be reelected. What would I regret most? And what I decided I regret most is that I would not have done anything for the Anacostia River. And so we did research and saw kind of what was going on across the world. And I saw that in Ireland, they were putting a 20-cent fee or tax on single-use disposable plastic bags. We did the research, my staff did with me for America, saw different efforts. I think Seattle tried to do 25 cents. And we also knew from a study that had been done is that about 47% of the trash in our tributaries were plastic bags, because they get hung up on sticks and bushes and stuff. And there was someone did an observation, an account of all that. And so we also knew that about 24% of the trash that we found in the river to be from plastic bags. So that is how that became our target. And worked with the council. We came up with the 5-cent bag fee. We called it the Anacostia River Cleanup Initiative. And from my social work background, I knew that if you could name, how you name something is how you talk about it. And so whenever we'd start to argue, or I'd be in a community, saying, we're going to charge you 5 cents for something you thought was free, it would become, I would say, well, what's the name of the bill? And it would always come back to, it's called the Anacostia River Cleanup Initiative. And so anybody that didn't agree with it would say, okay, I really want to clean up the river. I just don't want to do it this way. So we fast forward to today. The bill it was passed unanimously by the council. It's part of what we have. And it's 11 years. And No one has ever run for office to repeal the bill. And it collects about $2 to $2.5 million a year. And wanted to convince folks that it wasn't just a new way to get in your pocket, but it's a way to influence behavior. And so what money we do collect goes to cleaning up the Anacostia River, primarily, other waterways as well, but primarily the river. So that there was a nexus between the nickel, and for whatever reason, it has stuck, it works. And happy to talk more about that later. But I say that because when I ran for mayor, I did 2 terms on the council and really thought 2 terms was enough, and decided that I would run for mayor. And I knew I was a long shot, but I did that, and it was an amazing experience. But when Muriel Bowser won, she talked to her folks, and they decided they wanted to offer me a cabinet position. And interestingly, there's a couple of things. One is she said, "I want you to be the director of the environment." And I thought, wow, I'm a social worker. I have a law degree from Catholic. I didn't see that coming, but she said, "Yeah, no, that would be what everybody thinks. You should be director of the environment." But all right. And then I told friends, "Hey, I'm going to be director of the Department of the Environment." And this may sound funny to y'all now, but at the time, I would say 80% of the people I talked to said, "We have a Department of the Environment." And so I knew I had some work to do there. And so it became a major, major learning process for me. I had to learn about the regulatory structure of what the agency did. I had to learn where the budget, where all the funds come from. There's a lot of federal dollars from EPA and elsewhere that comes into the Department of the Environment. And I had to figure out, what do I want to accomplish in 4 years, and also get a sense of the staff. And at that time, we had 350 employees. And by the time I left, we had 500 employees. The agency grew dramatically. But I also had to figure out what my priorities were. And so after learning a lot about the agency, and what the agency does, the agency is in charge of water quality, air quality, hazardous waste, soil quality, but also energy. It's your Department of Energy. It does a number of things. It has 6 administrations. It also administers LIHEAP, which is funds to help people with their power bills, and it manages the support for residents around energy. And then also, which I didn't expect, and it's an anomaly in the law, it also put me on the board for the Department of DC Water. Now, I fought that because I had so much to learn to be your director of the Department of the Environment. And you had to learn terms like, for folks that are on here that know what I'm talking about, but things like TMDL, MS4, all these things relate to acronyms that are just too many words, so they have to break them down into these strange acronyms. And just learning the acronyms is hard enough. So I found out when I was asked to be, or told I should be on the board for DC Water, I had my attorney for the agency do a brief of why that was not practical, because I regulate DC Water. I'm their regulatory entity. And so he came into me with the law book and said, and I think it was Jim Graham that did this back when they moved DC Water out of DC government, said statutorily it says you're on their board of directors. Okay. So through, you'll probably may have been at the salon once with George Hawkins, but I was comfortable. I learned a lot from George Hawkins. He was the first director of Department of the Environment, and learned a lot about the regulatory part of clean water. And then he resigned from his position. The mayor made me the chair of DC Water. Now, this all comes together as we talk about our urban environment. The last thing I'll say is that about that process of getting up to speed is I went to COP21, which was the climate summit for the world in Paris, and that was in 2015. And there I fully understood, and it became very clear to me not only how much danger we were in and what was about to happen, but it was directly tied to energy. that you couldn't separate energy from the environment. So I went to the mayor and we changed the name of the department to the Department of Energy and Environment. And so that is part of the legacy, is that they are tied. And that's when I say we've moved up to 500 employees and almost doubled our budget. In many ways, that's because of the growth around the local jurisdiction's role in energy. So I decided I would set two goals of things that I would try to accomplish besides getting to where people would know what the Department of Environment was in DC. I decided that I would do something about energy, especially around renewables, solar, and all that. But the other was clean up the Anacostia River. So much of what happens in the environment of DC is inextricably, it's completely tied to our waterways. And I'll explain that in a moment. But those were two goals. And I think after 8 years, one of the things I'm most proud of is the progress we made together. And, it's clearly, it's not just me, it's a lot of brilliant people, but also your commitment to support us around the rates that you pay for DC water, for the tunnel projects, and also for the stormwater fees. Everything related to cleaning up that river has everything to do with the support of DC residents that are willing to help fund this. And there's rarely ever a movement to try to defund these environmental initiatives, which has really made my job more of a gift from you than it would be like in many other states in America, where they're trying to dial back these regulations and find them to be a burden on economic development or people's individual rights. In DC, people get it. So our environment on Capitol Hill is directly tied to the restoration of stormwater management in our community. You'll note that whenever we have a major public right-of-way resurfacing or where we pull the sidewalks up and stuff, think about the Eastern Market Metro stop and that plaza and how much there is now with bioswales and water retention, water capture projects all around that. And that was there by law, by regulation. My job became somewhat of the sheriff to enforce those regulations. You have to capture about 1.2 inches of rain for every rain event per square foot of surface, that especially surface that now you're responsible for either through a major renovation, new construction, or something like that. That's the strongest stormwater requirements in the country. And unlike Maryland, unlike other areas, there's no exception. So when the National Portrait Gallery put in the new median fountain, they had to retain 1.2 inches per square foot. And they called me and said, you don't understand, this is a beautification project. We're maxed out on our cost. We're not going to be able to do this. And I told them, you're the federal government. Maybe you can get Congress or somebody to exempt you, but you have to follow our regulations. And they did. And one of the most clever things, and I'm not sure they use this, is that the staff at DOEE and some of the folks Jeff Seltzer, who's a long-term resident on the Hill, they figured out things where you can actually create stormwater credits, where you take maybe part of a road through a cemetery and put it into a permeable surface after being impermeable, and then we'll certify a certain number of credits per 3 years, and you can sell those for when someone does a development project and they can't retain the amount of stormwater that's needed. They can buy that on the market, and it runs like a Craigslist where we sell them. So anybody that's that's forced to, they can comply. There's no impossibility to it. It's expensive though, very expensive. And any of you that's involved with the Congressional Cemetery know how expensive this is. And not sure what the answer is, other than to say that my job at DOE was to be the sheriff. Nobody got an exemption. You put in a new field for football or something like that, and you say everybody can play on it. If it's not all permeable, you're gonna have to meet our requirements no matter what. So what that does is that it filters the water before it gets to the river. It filters the water in a way that one of the number one things that's polluting our rivers is just stormwater runoff. And we make an agreement, it's called the MS4 permit, on a regular basis with EPA, saying we're going to capture this amount. We're going to do this to stop runoff. And so part of it is regulatory with the federal government, but also creativity and investment by DC government. So you've seen this greening everywhere. The other thing that you'll probably, hopefully are aware of and notice is that they're planted with indigenous species. That for so long, we thought urban America ought to be, a garden where you bring in foreign things, and it could be English ivy, could be other things. And actually could be honeysuckle, which is our most pervasive invasive species that we have. And so the stormwater requirements and retaining stormwater has begun to change our landscape with how we plant. The other thing we did, and then you helped fund, is that we put in a tunnel that we have a combined sewer system that at the time was avant-garde. It was the best public health thing you could do because we had canals run off, we had horses, we had manure, and it'd all go into the canals that would run into the rivers. So, and it become fetid. And so when we put in our sewer system, like other cities, it's captured the stormwater as well, but we didn't account for growth. And so very easily those systems get overwhelmed and just dump sewage straight into the rivers. So with under a class action lawsuit, DC Water is required to capture that water. And the way we do it is through a tunnel that's 100 feet down, a little bit bigger, around the same size as a metro tunnel. And it goes for miles. And the first one section is about 9 miles. It goes from underneath about around not St. Elizabeth, I mean the DC General. And you've seen that construction there over the years. It goes under there and goes all the way down to Blue Plains. And it sits in the tunnel after a big rain event. And then it's treated when it's not raining so that the water goes out far cleaner than how it came in. One of the things that we didn't anticipate was about 1 million tons of trash. I mean, the amount of trash that's captured through those tunnels and the screens is incredible. And you're seeing, I think, sometimes the difference in the Anacostia River because that system is now complete. It will capture 98% of all storm events. That 2% may exceed the system, but we know that at least 98% in its statistics. So some years will be 100%, some years will be a little bit more of stormwater runoff, and it's already having impact on the river cleanup. The other things that we've done is like what's the trash? You have bags that has gone down to almost the least thing that you ever find in the river. We had people used to blacken their driveways with coal tar, and that's is a very bad PAH that we've banned. So that doesn't run off in the river anymore. We pretty much have banned styrofoam. That used to be a major trash in the river. And so the river looks a lot cleaner. I think the other thing that's interesting to note is that, especially on the Anacostia River, that river was our industrial highway. So if you had a pile of coal, you had industrial uses that you did not necessarily want to have around residential areas, you did it along the river. And so we had a lot of contamination, especially things like coal tar that releases benzene for the coal gasification plant down by 11th Street Bridge. We had other uses, industrial uses, all along the river since the Civil War, and the munitions and other things that have gone in there. The architect of the Capitol, their tree nursery and plant nursery was on Poplar Point. They used chlordane, a number of other things like that don't break down very easily. And so the development that's happened along the Anacostia River actually has helped us to clean the river dramatically, or additional that you wouldn't think about, where a lot of the area around the Navy Yard was a brownfield. like I was just describing. So when you go down 35 feet and put in 2 levels of car parking, you have to remove all that dirt, which is contaminated, and you get down to good dirt, and then you take it, they amend it, they do the things they need to, but it's off the side of the river. And then when they build all the apartments and buildings along there, they have to capture stormwater, like the buildings before them did not. So they put in the bioswales. You've seen the plantings. It's indigenous species. It's really having, again, a major contributor to cleaning up the river. So those areas, and then I think the last area that I'll talk about in terms of impacting our environment, urban environment, has to do with stream restoration. Stream restoration, we used to decide that what we wanted to do is use our rivers as drainage ditches, get water out as fast as possible. So we took the streams that were in our city and straightened them out into ditches. Often when we had to, we would pave them, and if necessary, we'd put them in pipes just to run the water out as fast as possible. Well, that's not good. That carries a lot of pollutants directly into the waterways. And so for the exposed ditches and streams, and you've seen a number of these, is that we've rewilded them. Now, rewilding means that you're really kind of playing God. What you do is you smooth out the sides back again, you make it serpentine, you throw some logs in there that you've cut, and some rocks, boulders, stones, and you create an amenity, but you recreate the stream. The very best example of that is at the National Arboretum. They had a drainage ditch that was getting deeper and deeper. And the deeper that it goes, it just takes sediment straight into the river, sediments the river, and also the pollutants that are attached to it. We rewilded the stream at the Arboretum. And what was fun, and I have to say, and I'll come back to this at the end, of what's most gratifying about this job, what's fun is that nature came back. That right away, fish started swimming back up from the Anacostia River into that stream. And then the fish brought shorebirds, and you started seeing shorebirds along both sides of the stream. It was a remarkable transformation that we all saw by turning this drainage ditch back into a stream. And I have to say, the people that work at DOEE, and many of you know them, they are some of the best committed, values-driven people I have ever met in my life. It was such a joy to work with them for 8 years. And I think one of the hardest things about the pandemic was not being around my staff. They are incredible folks. One person that some of you may know from his statehood work and stuff is a guy named Josh Birch. And we were bringing a delegation from another country through to show how he oversees rewilding of streams. And he was standing on the bridge looking at the stream that we had restored. And they said, well, how do you know what to do when you like, is there an architectural plan? Do you bring in a landscape architect? How do you do this? And Josh looked out over the stream, kind of a faraway gaze, and turned back and said, first thing you have to figure out is, where does the stream want to go? I thought, wow, okay, that's a metaphor. That's the kind of staff that we have. And I have to say, he's one of the people that I kept trying to promote. And he said, no, I'm fine. I love my job. And that is the people who work for us at Department of Energy and the Environment. So some of the things that you have seen, besides the rewilding and the nature coming back, it obviously has the impact of cooling our city. The trees are magic. They absorb so much water. They cool the city. They provide habitat. And it's having an amazing impact. If you just walk around the law enforcement memorial on a hot day over by the National Building Museum, where there's trees overhanging from both sides, it's a 5 to 10 degree difference when you walk through that area. It has a big difference. So the plantings, all of that is making a difference. And so for me, some of the lessons learned, that one of the things is that nature is nature. It's when you open the door for nature to come back, nature does. And when I was first here, I remember I used to, like, now and then when I was going to law school, study at the Madison Library. I'd sit out there and I'd have a sandwich. And you had to like cover it and stuff because the pigeons would try to get your food if you're sitting outside. you go through Union Station and it looks like a movie, all the pigeons flying up into the sky. We have so much fewer pigeons. And some of you may know about this. There's been at least one or two Cooper's hawks on Capitol Hill that feeds on our pigeons. The raptors have come back. At first, people would notice that in New York City and other places because they're resting on their ledges and stuff. But as they have come back in, it's just, that's at the top of the food chain. So you don't see all the other things. But things have come back. I know that in front of our building at DOEE at first and M Northeast, that 1200 block, our staff planted a bioswale and they put in milkweed, and what it means to be in a meeting and see a monarch butterfly go by. It's like, wow, this really happens. So I learned that nature's in it with us. And as we do restoration, and these are lessons that we've all learned in different ways, but it was surprising to me because I'm working with so many scientists that talk about total maximum daily load, the diet, the river diet of runoff, all these things that you kind of lose sight that nature's got a role in this too. And it happens. And so some things are unintended, like the rabid fox on the Capitol grounds that had a kit or had pups, but that you are seeing more and more fox come back in, or the tom turkey that was running after the joggers on the other side of the Anacostia River Trail and was really hurting people. And we couldn't catch him. We tried, but eventually he either died or he stopped. But, there's a flock of turkey over there next to the Anacostia River now. And I think the last thing, and then would love to just talk about any of these things that you want to talk about. I think the last thing is, it's kind of a unique DC experience, but it has to do with the eagles that were at and are at the National Arboretum, that we're on the 7th or 8th generation of eagles that roost or nest there. And the reason that's important is when you think about America with DDT, chloridane, PAHs, and all the other things we did to pollute, but also to try to grow food, kill bugs, we were down to 500 nesting pair of eagles for the whole nation. We didn't know if we were going to lose this bird. And we've not only have we, we've stopped DDT, stopped a lot of those pollutants, but also with all the things that we've done on the Anacostia River, that the eagles that were nesting right there at the Arboretum, they feed almost solely on the Anacostia River, that they are the end of the food chain. With bioaccumulation, whether it be PCBs or other pollutants that work their way up through the food chain, the eagles get it all. And they are healthy. They have fledged at least generally two eaglets per year. And the funny thing is, maybe it's because we're DC, and I think most of y'all followed some of this. First, we were pretty excited about it. We put a camera on them, and and so they've done this in other parts of the country, but we're DC, so we noticed there's a place where they could hide. So we put a second camera on them, and that started getting everybody's attention, and people started watching these eagles, especially as they built their nest and all. And I'll throw in there, hey, I have to take a little sideline here, or side break. My first day second day in January 2015, got on the elevator going to DOEE, there was a guy that got on there with me all bundled up in green with the logo for DC on his shirt or coat. I said, "You obviously work for us. Who are you?" And he said, "My name's Dan." And I said, "Well, Dan," I stepped out the elevator with him. I said, "Dan, what do you do?" He said, "Well, I'm an ornithologist. I track all the birds." And I thought about that for a while, because we had people that didn't know we had a Department of Environment. I said, "So you're Dan the Birdman. How did you get to be Dan the Birdman?" He said, well, I was an accountant, hated my job, was behind a desk, went to the office, hated it, went to the University of Maryland, got a master's in environmental science, and I specialized in birds. And I applied for the job with y'all, and I became your bird man. And I said, Dan, let me know when you go out. Sometime I'd like to go out with you. He says, well, I go out 4 days a week, rain, sleet, or snow, to observe our birds. And I was really impressed by that. So when the eagles started getting all the attention, I wanted to make sure that it was Dan the Birdman that was on TV, that was talking to the Post. And every time he talked, that they said the DC Department of Environment, or later Energy and Environment, so that people begin to realize, oh, we have a Department of Environment. And Dan the Birdman was my poster guy for that. He lives on the Hill. Some of you may know him or his kids, just a wonderful, wonderful man. But we made him a star, but we did it because we wanted everybody in DC to know we had a department that looked over nature. So back to the eagles, the only time they didn't fledge or have I'll also say what we did, because we're DC, we didn't know what they did at night, so we put an infrared camera on them too. And when that wasn't enough, we put a microphone up there. We had the most surveillance of an eagle's nest in the country, in the world. And so the only time they didn't have kids, as you know, it's POTUS, and at the time it was FLOTUS, that we named the eagles. What happened was that as that is wont to happen in wealthier societies or wherever, there was domestic influence, and a younger woman eagle came in and disrupted, and POTUS chose her. And so they didn't have any eggs that year. And so FLOTUS moved on, and then we were left with LOTUS. So they're still there, and they are successful, but they also show us that if you build it, they will come. I mean, we're covered in eagles now throughout America, but the symbol for us of restoring, what Anacostia River had all those things: DDT, PCBs, chloridane, all that stuff. For these birds to now thrive on our river is the symbol of what's possible when we do our part. And that has been incredibly rewarding for me, to see that, but also, again, to be sure that everyone has access to the river. I didn't know that when I passed the bag bill that it would mean that I became the director of this department. I also didn't know that I'd get to spend the money. And as you know, we use it on trash traps and nonprofits, but free boat rides. And the idea was with Anacostia Watershed Society and with Riverkeeper, that we helped them buy boats. Boats hold up 20 some people, that if we took people for free out on the river that people are helping pay to restore, they'd care about it. But they'd also tell their politicians, they'd tell their leadership, this is important to us. We want you to fund this. And it has worked really well. And hopefully many of you have been on that trip. It's astounding. It's what an amazing asset that we have of that river, but it reflects all the things that we do in restoring and creating an urban environment in Washington, D.C. So with that, Trudy, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Tommy. I don't see anything in the chat, but let me ask you, you've talked a lot about water, but you haven't talked about air, and we all breathe this stuff.
That's a great question. I mean, obviously, the more trees we plant, the better it is for the air. The areas that I've been most concerned about in terms of environmental impacts have been either air or heat islands. It used to be that if you did from above the heat island, the worst heat island in the city, one of the very worst, was the RFK parking lots. By turning them into fields, we really mitigated them being heat islands, but it's the heat that mixes with the air that creates compounds or creates air problems, especially with nitrous oxide, that cause trigger problems for people with breathing problems. So by lowering the heat, it takes that toxic soup out a little bit. But one of the areas that is the worst is along Amtrak, that where they have the trains and they store and they do work on the trains along Amtrak from Union Station into Ward 5 down Bladensburg Road. That if you look at the air quality, that's one of the worst air quality areas. And one of them is because they use something called switchers. And if you know what switchers are, it's because, like me, you're a train nerd. Switchers are the engines that they use to move the trains around all on the tracks there for either getting them cleaned, getting them worked on, or just adding different cars. The switchers are moving 24 hours. They use their oldest engines to be switchers. Your oldest engines can be well over 50 some years old. They're using old diesel. And that is the worst thing to burn in an engine is old diesel. And so these engines, 5 or 6 of them moving 24 hours a day, spewing the combustion of diesel fuel, is one of the areas that we have worked on to try to help improve the air quality right there. And we took the Volkswagen money. We won't go into it, but Volkswagen cheated. They had to do a settlement. We got $8 million. And we said, Amtrak, however much you want of this $8 million, you can have to help either get clean diesel or one day hopefully go electric. But they're not ready for that in terms of infrastructure. But we've spent a lot of time on that. Other thing about air quality, which is something very important to Capitol Hill, is that we have a coal-fired power plant on Capitol Hill, as you know. And that is part of under the architect of the Capitol, right next to the Capitol, over there, southwest, technically southeast. And so I tried to figure out, I thought, while I'm here, I want to somehow shut that down. So we were able, before the conservatives took back over government, we were able to they have 2 major combustion plants there. We were able to get one turned over to gas. And then the other one they stopped the conversion when they came into power, and it stayed coal. And people that live in that area have seen soot in the winter at times on their windowsills from this coal-fired plant. So what I did at DOEE, now the federal government generally follows all our regulations. So I put in a regulation that kicks in, I believe in 2006, that says you cannot have a combustion hotter than a certain level that really only coal is burned at. And so the regulation was passed, it's in place, and I think I have phased out the coal burning plant. Now they're going to do gas, but it's a whole lot better than coal. And so I think on air quality that I phased that out with my team. And mind you, the architect of the Capitol fought very hard to say, we don't want to do this. This is expensive. The money's not there. But we did it. We'll see if it's fully in place by 2026.
That's terrific. We've had a little dialogue in the chat, and Patricia Malumbi wanted to know, how do we get on one of those river tours? And Mary Bloodworth from the Village is saying, if I've got 15 people to go, I'll work it out for the Village to take a group. But what's the answer? How do you get on one of those tours?
She's exactly right. Just call the riverkeeper or let me know. I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing in retirement. First, I had to really convince myself to retire, and all of y'all know what that process is like. And so one of the things I wanted to do is be sure to work on the things that I felt most passionate about. So I'm on the board of the riverkeeper. And so they, gosh, I've been there with different groups. I don't know, I'm trying to remember who I went with Paul Cromwell's group, but there's no question Capitol Hill Village is exactly the group, a group that we want to take out. And so either shoot an email to me and I'll send it to, say, Trey Sherrard, who's the guy that takes people out on the boats, or we'll send it over to Anacostia Watershed Society, whichever one you want to go out on. And they leave from the dock down at Navy Yard. It's really easy and fun. I highly recommend it.
Okay, Maria, I can't see the screen. Do we have any hands up?
We don't. Come on, folks. Let's see.
I'm happy to talk more about
Okay.
our environment.
Wait,
I can tell you that what
come on.
Oh, Connie Citro, we'll let her ask a question real quick.
Yes, roof gardens. Downtown DC in particular, reducing the heat effect. What's can be done in that regard with roof gardens or something to reflect heat?
Well, for the past 6 years, we've added more roof gardens in sheer numbers per year than any other city in the nation.
Great.
and that's because that always goes back to these stormwater requirements. That if you put a roof garden, it captures water and you start meeting your requirements. Now, what you see in the older buildings, in many buildings, the roof can't hold a full garden. So they'll use something called sedum. And it's a very shallow, light plant that is very hardy. And that is one of the ways that we do our green roofs. But otherwise, roof gardens more and more are becoming amenities on these new apartment buildings that have gone up all across, whether it be the wharf, Navy Yard, Union Market neighborhood. They're putting a lot of roof gardens on there, so they have to put the structure in there because people like the community gardens on their roofs. So we've done a good job, but it isn't just because people like them. It's because it's a great way to meet your stormwater requirements is to put in a roof garden. That's a great question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Tommy,
Thank you.
Tommy, I've got a question from Gary Peterson.
Hello, Tommy. This is Gary. I have a question back on air a little bit. When Capitol Hill Restoration Society opposed the environmental impact statement for the 11th Street Bridge and the associated roadways going up and down the river there, one of the things that concerned me was the air quality along the highways there, especially the one going by. There's a grade school right there where the highway goes right by, and what I discovered was at that time, so I'm hoping things have changed. There were only like 4 or 5 different places in the city where air quality was measured, and coincidentally, all of them were not where pollution was. So we had wonderful statistics, but like where the school was, there wasn't anything to measure the pollution. That's one thing. And then, so I was hoping that there were more areas where that were measuring pollution. And the second thing was there was no measurement for nanoparticles, which, as you know, can cause lots of breathing problems, not only in adults, but also with children. So could you talk a little bit about what's been done since 10 years ago when there was the EIS for the 11th Street Bridge?
So the pollution come from cars is not like it was when we were kids. When they finally went to unleaded gasoline, the number one problem with cars really was lead. In fact, the legacy of lead in the ground is really where we still have lead in the environment. Hopefully that continues to abate with with rain and everything else. But the what you said about the sensors were expensive. They're not as expensive now, but they were expensive. And everybody that put them in cities across America did it with federal money. And the federal money only puts it where there's federal roads. And that would be anything like New York Avenue, or Highway 50, or major arterials where the federal government is like a highway. That's not going to necessarily be around schools or around senior centers or around low-income neighborhoods necessarily. And so your air sensors were, and there weren't that many, were again positioned on roads. Now, the city has slowly but started to invest in mobile air sensors, where you put it in a car, or the car is specially outfitted, and you drive a neighborhood. and you get the readings at a micro level. So if there's a neighborhood that's concerned that's next to an industrial zone or something else, that they're piloting that now. I believe we have one running now. It certainly is. We funded that, but that's really the state of the art now, is where you don't have stationary sensors. Now, when all the construction was going on down by Greenleaf, that area on Buzzard Point, we did fund and put in a permanent sensor at the Greenleaf Rec Center, because whether they were tearing things down to put in the soccer stadium, all the other stuff, and that's a vulnerable community with poor health outcomes, or disproportionate poor health outcomes, that you're generally, what you do is the construction company is required to put up their own sensor and give you readings, but there's a lot of distrust around the development. So we did pay and put in our own at Greenleaf. Now, all these readings are handled, they come in remotely to one office at DOEE, and they get looked at every morning, every day, from staff that are trained to look at these readings. Now, the deployment of mobile air sensors really is now the state of the art, because if you have something like we have a plant that makes glue and stuff in the area over by, I'm blanking on it. But we do have an area that they made glue, and it's right in a residential neighborhood, and it smells. And we were concerned that it's toxic. And so we were able to deploy and start testing their air. And that was turned out that it smells, but it wasn't to a certain level. I think the other thing is, what's fun to know is that, Gary, I don't know if you know this, but we have a trained, gosh, I don't know what to call him, but he's like a smell ecologist. We have a guy that goes out and he actually puts a cone, like a bullhorn, to his nose, and he smells. And he's been trained to smell different pollutants. So it could be as simple as you've got an open pit barbecue restaurant, and the neighbors are saying this is too much. First thing we do is we'd send him out there, and he'd put the cone to his nose at different times of the day to smell if it's blowing their way, and then we move on from there. So you still can't get beyond just the human sense. But the other thing is, as you know, in terms of the particle pollution, there's the worst particle pollution we've had, at least in the past 50 years, I think, were the fires in Canada. And when it blew down through New York down to DC, and we couldn't let kids go out and play in this, we had a big stay inside warning. And that was a year and a half ago. And that was, we're going to have more of that. And in terms of that particle, the particle pollution, the worst thing that we're going to have are these fires. The other stuff, mostly making a lot of progress on.
Thank you.
Okay. Any final questions from?
I'll give you a final thing. And, the thing that I brought to this agency, I knew was like, I'm not a earth science person. And I thought, okay, what I bring to the agency is that I can put you on the map. So one of the first things I did is I called Tom Sherwood, said, I'm going to give you an exclusive. You're going to go out with my team that goes out if buses are idling, or to just give them warnings, or to just tell them we have a new bus idling law. And so he brought cameras with him and watched my team go up into buses that were like in front of Air and Space and say, this is just to let you know that this is the anti-idling law for DC. And so the staff got to see themselves on TV, show their family that's what we do. That was one thing I did. The second thing I did is to try to get people to understand that we did have the Department of the Environment, is that I told everybody, we're going to do an omnibus, waterways bill that, include anything that you ever wanted in an omnibus, environmental bill, and just throw it in there, because that's how we do things in government. And so they came up with the omnibus bill for, and I said, we're going to put the name fisheries on it. So the omnibus fisheries bill. And so we had hearings on the omnibus fisheries bill. And so that was part of telling the council and everybody else, we had a department that did this work. And the last thing that it did in there, which I didn't know they put in there, gave us the opportunity to take control and turn Kingman Island into a conservation district. It's the first time that DOEE has held land. It's under DOEE's control administratively. And that's our city conservation district. It's our state park. It's our wildlife refuge. And that is what we got through the omnibus bill and gave the mayor the power to do that. And that's why we have Kingman Island, that is not going to be Children's Island, not going to be a parking lot for RFK. It is our conservation area and wildlife district.
We have one final question again from Patricia Malumbi, who says she drove past the sewage treatment plant last week and the smell was bad. Is that usual these days?
It's a sewage treatment plant. It depends on which way the wind is blowing. We've all some mornings gotten up, walk out of our Capitol Hill home and say, I think I smelled the fishmongers down there in Southwest. Or, you know what? That's the sewage treatment plant blowing our way. That is, it's, you have the most modern, largest sewage treatment plant in the developed country in the world. And it has the largest biodigester, which burns a lot of that methane that normally causes smell. It's the largest biodigester in North America. And it provides energy for at least 1/4, if not 1/3 of the sewage treatment plant, which is your highest user of energy or electricity of any user in your city. So we're burning the methane. We're state of the art. We're doing our best on the smell, but it's a sewage treatment plant and it's big.
Well, that's an odd way to end this segment, but thank you very, very much, Tommy, for talking about our city and its livability and what has happened to make it more livable and what we can look forward to in the future. Thank you to everybody for joining us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you again at a Village Voices in September. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.